According to the latest property sector market size report released by the Property Sector Charter Council, it released some compelling insights. The property sector market size is valued at 5.8 trillion rand, yet indicates that black people are still largely excluded from this property sector value chain. True empowerment in the property sector is still a far cry from the majority of our SA population, with property a large contributor to the SA economy to date. Since '96 has seen some membership profile changes, but the barriers to entry continue to exclude a vast majority. South African Institute for Black Property Owners, SIBOB, is a body which aims to lead transformation within the South African property sector by facilitating economic participation and skills development for the previously disadvantaged individuals. Now, it hosts its annual convention focusing on pertinent issues which continue to plague a vast majority, with topics including land reform, property ownership, public sector transformation policies and sustainable economic development, amongst many other topics. Vuyiswa Muchekwane, CEO of SIBOB, joins us in studio to unpack. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Vuyiswa, just in terms of the current ownership patterns in South Africa, can you break it down for us, please?
Yeah, so I think a good starting point is to understand how the sector is segmented to begin with. So the largest portion of the 5.8 trillion that you spoke of is allocated to the residential property sector. That's mine and your houses. And that equates to about 3.9 trillion rand in terms of asset value. Now, in the residential sector, you obviously have estate agents who are responsible for, the buying and selling of the houses. And when it comes to estate agents, we're looking at a mere 3% representation of black-owned estate agencies, and only 13% of estate agents themselves are black. And why is that important? That's important because there's 4 billion rand that is being transacted annually in the residential sector alone, and that only 13% of those commissions are going to black estate agents. And then if I move on over to the commercial side, which is valued at 1.3 trillion, 90% of that is dominated by the listed sector. And even within the listed sector, again, you see this massive skewing of ownership patterns where, well, let me not say ownership patterns, let me say, we've only got less than 10% of the listed companies which are black originated, managed, controlled companies. Of course, in the listed sector, you have a bit of dilution when it comes to ownership because of the, complex shareholder structures. But it's fair to say that less than 10% of those companies are companies that were originally black-owned companies.
So in light of that, what are the socioeconomic conditions or problems that the property sector faces at this point, 20 years post-democracy?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest sort of barriers to entry, if I may say that, would definitely speak to access to capital. So be it on the residential side or on the commercial side, the capital requirements and the ability for your average black entrepreneur or average black first-time homeowner to access the market are very high. The way risk is assessed and understood in our, financial services sector does not serve to benefit the majority of the population. So really the issue that we have here is that we have an entire sector that has the ability, that contributes 6% to our GDP, so, and has a huge opportunity to be a job-creating mechanism, a capital creation mechanism, and an injection for development, and we're just not seeing black participation in that space. So, if we're not turning around one of the key contributors as an industry, it's safe to say that the economy itself is not transforming.
Who is SIBOB and what is your role in the transformation conversations that continue to happen at this point?
So SIBOB is a 22-year-old organization that focuses primarily on advocacy. Okay. We are a voice for black practitioners within the property sector. Our objective is to, we work very closely with government, we work equally as closely with the private sector and with the various role players in the industry to encourage and put pressure on these role players to fast track transformation. So really ours is to see our objective is to see an industry that will ultimately be more representative of the society we live in, and ultimately to see an injection of new enterprises, new mega enterprises that can carry the job creation needs of our economy right now.
Last year was the 20th convention that Cyberbit hosted. I mean, this year it will host it again. I mean, how does one measure the success rates of the conversations and the platform that the convention offers at this point?
Well, I think in terms of measurement of success, we are fortunate, that we do have, the research that exists and comes out of the Sector Charter Council, and the sad part of it is that we can safely say that we are nowhere near reaching our goals. Yeah. And I suppose now the conversation is about how do we fast track, how do we fast track inclusive growth? How do we move closer to our objectives and perhaps work on shorter timelines? We need to start saying, okay, let's look 5-year period and let us as an industry perhaps set growth targets around setting new businesses and new black-owned entities, and I think that really needs to be a priority for the industry, and the charter needs to be there to help to monitor and measure and report on that. I
mean, I know this is broad, but then what opportunities are available at this point for black people entering the space?
There absolutely are. There are a lot of opportunities, and I think, it should not be misconstrued that I'm saying that there aren't any. I think that when we speak about ownership patterns, in terms of physical owning of the asset, that is where, people are presented with more challenges. But the value chain of the sector is huge. You have property management and services. You've got facilities management. And down the value chain, you've got a myriad of opportunities. You've also got support sectors. There's the whole green economy that is coming up. There is a township economy that we are speaking of that relies heavily on the services of people in our sector. So it's definitely not it's a sector that we all interact with daily, perhaps without even acknowledging it or knowing that we're interacting with it. And there are a number of opportunities. I think the key thing, though, is that unless we can get the ownership patterns right, we are not going to be able to unlock the massive opportunities that exist down the value chain. And that's really why it's so important to focus on ownership and get that part right first.
And as you rightly mentioned, there are different players who are involved or have a responsibility to facilitate that transformation. What is the financial sector doing to help enable that? I mean, barriers to entry, as you mentioned, is capital, which most don't have access to.
Look, I mean, as an organization, we have engaged to a certain extent with the financial services sector, and I believe that, there are processes underway where that introspection is happening and where, processes are being reviewed. However, the financial services sector, I mean, property aside, the financial services sector sits at the heart of unlocking business and enterprises and small business financing. And I think that as a country and as a sector, the financial services sector needs to review, the way it's done business. It hasn't changed. And it's great because we do have this stable financial services sector, and we are revered globally for having this very stable banking sector and but is there enough unity of vision? Is there enough developmental thinking? And I'm not even just saying from the banks. I'm even challenging the DFIs, because you will find that the DFIs themselves are bound to just mimic the same lending policies that the bank would give you. So it really, we don't have outlets for developmental financing. And without that, we're not going to develop as a country. And it's really incumbent on the financial services sector to do that introspection and come up with a growth plan and communicate to us how they plan to review their current processes.
Education, skills development's also touted as a big way to help transform. How does how does government or even the private sector help with that inclusive growth for new entrants, the youth, females, black people at large?
I mean, I cannot stress enough the importance of education and the importance of skills. And I think we all understand that. But I think what hasn't happened enough is unity of vision again with regards to the commercial needs of the country. So, you know, we're graduating a whole lot of students. That's
Yes.
fine. But then they're unemployable.
Yeah.
Or they're not getting taken up by industry. So where are the blockages there? And that's what we need to understand. And why is it that we are graduating, you know, university level students even in many cases who are not job ready, who are not actually skilled to do work? And I think that also requires a fair amount of introspection from our side. We need to be able to say, you know, these are the core industries that are going to support the growth of this economy. And it doesn't need to be 50 industries. Let us pick 5, for example, or 10, and say these are going to be the pillars of our economic growth as a country. And then we're going to put all of our resources behind educating and skilling people to be able to service those particular industries, you know?
Yeah.
And having a little bit more focus and leadership in that regard, I believe, would turn this ship around.
What about mindsets and perceptions out there? I mean, just in terms of challenges that black participants face, I mean, reputation-wise, even just the availability or access of people who are black, who operate within us in certain spaces, real estate for that matter,
No, absolutely. And what you are referring to is often sometimes referred to as a trust deficit. You know, there is fundamentally a trust deficit between those who control access to economic opportunities and those who are seeking economic opportunities. And unfortunately, due to our history, those lines are drawn along color lines, along race lines. So you also have the sort of structural barriers to entry where, you know, just by sheer virtue of speaking a different language, if you come from a different language group and are unable to communicate or sell your business plan effectively in English, you know, to a financier whose first language is English, that in itself is a structural barrier. If you're unable in an interview to communicate, you know, what your skills are, and you don't have the confidence of the language to be able to communicate, that in itself is a structural barrier. And just cultural differences and not understanding, and that's why again I go back to ownership to say, even as a woman, you know, there are gender differences, and I go back to ownership and saying once the ownership patterns change, it gets easier to unlock and enable people to access those opportunities.
Well, we're out of time. When is the convention? What can we expect this time round?
The convention will be taking place on the 2nd and 3rd of August at the Houghton Golf Club in Johannesburg. And this year, once again, we really want to tackle this topic of inclusive growth and say what role do we as an industry have to play, and how do we fast track this process? We'll be looking at issues around enterprise development and whether it really is a thing that is happening and why are we not seeing it happening. We'll be looking at land reform and urban land reform in particular, and how we create you know, access to housing. So it'll be very interesting, and I hope to see you there.
Thank you, Reese, once again for joining us. Of course, that was Cyber CEO Vuka Muchekane. It's time for a break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
This week on The Talk Show, we test out the new Peugeot 2008 and take a look at the sexy S1000RR. We also reveal the hot new Kia Picanto. Catch all that and more this Saturday at 12:30 p.m. Repeat Sunday at 9:30 a.m. and 8:30 p.m.
Always the last one to find out the score? Then why not switch to DStv Premium? Slip into the driver's seat and race alongside your favorite Formula One stars. Catch the Pro-Tier fire as we take on the world's best. And back the box in their sidestepping, fast-tackling campaign for international glory. To watch all of this and many more exclusive sporting events on up to 5 devices off just one subscription, dial *120*.